Welcome and thank you for joining us today for DevSecOps, why automation and security are critical to successful cross-functional teams. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Will Schoeppner, Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. Will is an accomplished information technology and business operations leader with more than 25 years of experience developing, managing, and leading business operations, integrated technology, and vendor management. Prior to joining EMA, he led strategy and performance for the Governor's Office of Information Technology as a Deputy Chief Strategy Officer. And before I hand things over to Will, I wanted today's audience to know that he will be concluding his presentation today by taking your questions. Feel free to log them anytime using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email later today with resources from today's event. So I hope you'll check that out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Will Schoeppner. Will?
Thank you, Raleigh. I appreciate it, and thank you for the warm introduction. I would also like to thank our sponsors that sponsored this research, AppDynamics, part of Cisco, and VMware, the Tanzu team. They've been amazing sponsors as part of this research, and we had some really interesting and engaging dialogue as we're going through this research. So hopefully I can really share their insights and thoughts as well. So overall, just a quick agenda on this research and what I'll be covering today. I want to talk about the overall research about DevOps teams and really building on that success and why it's just that natural progression. When we've seen the collaboration of IT teams and DevOps, then really next we're seeing the adoption of DevSecOps, so adding security to that DevOps world. And really then how we can integrate that and why that is so important in driving these collaboration teams and building on that success. So a couple of things that we'll talk about really is those three pillars that you often hear about around people, process, and technology, or specifically the tools. And then we'll talk about some upcoming trends and where things are going. And then really that key, that kind of glue on the next piece of adding security on why this is so important and how security and automation can really drive collaboration. So first, just to talk a little bit about the overall study and the breakdown. So there was 150 qualified participants. Originally, there was 380 respondents took the survey, but looking at different things like bots and making sure that they were fully qualified within the demographics, we end up with 150. And then you can see the location is a pretty even breakdown between the US and Europe. So France, Germany, and UK at 49%, the US being 51%. And then company size, pretty even distribution, a little bit higher within that 2,500 to 5,000 range. But I was very pleased with just kind of the overall breakdown. And then next, looking at industry. And again, a pretty good even mix across the board by industry. So you can see those numbers and percentages there overall. So now to really just jump into the study. Like I said, first of all, we wanted to look at DevOps teams and really understanding the makeup of organizations that have embarked on the DevOps journey and really what has made them successful. And then we'll use that as really that building block on then moving into bringing security into that DevSecOps world. So not surprising, you can see here, when we ask, how long have you had cross-functional teams within your organization? For example, DevOps, you can see overwhelmingly, DevOps has been around for some time. Even 45% of the companies have had DevOps for 6 years or more. And then if we look overall, At 88% of them have had DevOps for 3 years or even more. So this is nothing new. So there's definitely a lot of lessons that we can learn across the board on why has this been so successful. So, and then just really quickly breaking it down by region. So seeing the differences of the US versus Europe. Also, probably not that surprising. DevOps has been around a little bit longer in the US than in those European countries. But I want to hold a thought here. There's going to be an interesting slide here in a little bit that will actually add to this. And then we asked, how long has the organization had cross-functional teams by industry? So you can see finance, banking being number one, but actually not surprising, followed by healthcare, retail, and technology have been the industries that adopted this early on. And then also, as what we would expect when we ask, are you seeing a direct impact to your business outcomes? Because really that's the key on having the collaboration, driving technology change within your organization, and really tying it to those business outcomes. And you can see that 38%, when we combine strongly agree and agree, are seeing those business outcomes from having cross-functional teams. So this was the point that I mentioned before, that I said I was going to come back to. So even though the US companies have seen DevOps a little bit longer than European companies, this was one of the more interesting findings in the research, that European countries, however, are seeing a greater impact of having cross-functional teams. They're seeing a more direct impact to their business outcomes. So I thought that was really interesting within the research. And then when we ask, what's the greatest challenge of creating silos? Because we all know that IT teams are notorious for having silos within your organization. The number one reason given was competing goals and priorities. It's really that biggest challenge. But then next, the responsibilities are in separate tools. So, and there's a data point that's actually not in these slides, that's in the overall greater part of the research, that really shows that the majority of companies still, even though that they have collaboration teams like DevOps and DevSecOps, still priorities and work are done in independent tools depending on the team. There's not a unified platform for that collaboration across the board in most organizations. And so that's kind of overall the organization and makeup and showing the successes, really some of the challenges. But now I want to just dive into that first pillar that we talk about, and that's around people. Because really in people, and that also includes having a strong strategy and a leadership that is focused around that collaboration is so critical for the success of collaboration teams. So this is one of the first areas that I wanted to look at within this study. And then, so you can see, we asked the question about the respondents' organization and their culture when it comes to cross-functional teams. So I was actually really pleased to see the results of this question. And you can see that 76%, when we look at extremely collaborative and very collaborative organizations, felt that their culture really is focused around having collaborative teams. The next key point when it comes to people, not surprising when we ask what the greatest benefit of having cross-functional teams being greater overall project success. That's kind of where we would expect that number one answer to be. But then I look at the next three down on that list: increased communication, engaged employees, increased team diversity. These are all benefits of having cross-functional teams. And as far as the respondents are indicating, these are some of the top reasons and benefits of having cross-functional teams. So this can really drive that employee engagement. And as we know, tied to employee engagement is also customer satisfaction. So all these things go hand in hand. And then what are some of the challenges of implementing cross-functional teams within the organization? So you can see this is also just another way of asking the question. As we talked about before, competing goals and priorities. But then the next one really is insufficient resources. And then also the absence of clearly defined objectives and outcomes. So this goes back, really tying in some of those first points that we talked about on why it's so important to have really a focus on collaboration across the board and have seamless with the communication within your technology, and then really having that strong culture as well. So the second pillar that I want to talk about is around process. And I threw this question in here because I felt it was extremely important. From what I've seen on companies implementing DevOps or even Agile, that there's some struggles that companies go through along that journey. And a lot of times it's because when technology teams or the technology department is embarking on DevOps and Agile and these different areas, that the rest of the organization is lagging behind. But we're seeing that there's a change, there's a shift here. There's a fundamental understanding that the business units within the organization need to be aligned to what the technology departments are doing. It's pretty difficult to have an agile methodology within your organization, but yet your supply chain or your procurement or your budget cycles are still very rigid. So there tends to be friction within the organization, and it really tends to lead to challenges within those IT departments. So I asked the question, does your organization implement agile methodology in different areas within the business? So you can see, even within so obviously we would expect the technology projects, but then we look at that next one. So you can see agile methodology being used in non-IT projects, which is now this progression. You're seeing this maturity of companies move into this. But then the next one, actually not surprising, HR. I have seen this where HR now are embracing things like huddles and understanding really, and this isn't having a full-blown agile methodology, but taking the pieces and parts that they can use to benefit their departments, but then allows them to understand really what the IT departments are working on. In the case of HR, it allows them to better understand really about the individuals, the personalities, the skill sets that they are looking for when doing placement for those IT departments. And then when we see things like procurement and supply chain, those are really critical areas that are needing to be aligned to those IT functions. Oh, and then next pillar, I think, kind of jumped a slide, but really around that technology or specifically tools. So we asked about what is your overall satisfaction within your current cross-functional team protection and collaboration tools. So you can see only 51% of the respondents are somewhat satisfied, and then it goes to only 19% are very satisfied. So there's a lot of room within that collaboration tool set for companies to improve on. And a lot of that, as we talk about, are being able to use tools across different IT functions. As I mentioned before, we're still seeing different IT teams, even though DevOps have been implemented, or even DevSecOps, the individual teams are still working independently within different tool sets. So that leads to this next question, is then how often are companies looking at their tool sets? And I will say with this slide, probably within the next study, or actually within this data, I can see if we have enough of an end. The response would be very different if you look at that executive level versus the developer. And the reason for that is because the developers are looking at new tools, new technology every day. And we can see this in some of the data here, that 21% of the respondents are looking at their tools every 6 months to 1 year. Even 17% are saying that there's no time frame, that they're just always looking at their tool sets. So we're seeing where the developers are needing to be able to keep up on technology because things are moving at such a rapid rate that they're looking for anything to really drive that change and make it easier for them. And then that executive level is needing to come in a line. Instead of looking at standards every year, they need to embrace what's going on within their ranks. So we're seeing that shift and that change right now. But that also brings to that next point on this slide on really looking at those tools, and what the developers are looking at will be everything to include open source services and products. Because really this is where we're seeing that rapid change, and teams can really see a strong benefit in embracing open source. But this is also why we asked the question the way that we did, that how concerned are you about active vulnerabilities in your open source services? And you can see within here, if we combine very concerned and concerned, that 41% responded that it is something that they are aware of. And then to tie into that, to bring it a little bit further, we asked, do you rely on commercial support for your open source services to prevent those active vulnerabilities? And you can see pretty much overwhelmingly they do, especially 48% when we combine always and very often. So that brings us into the next part of this talk, and that is looking at trends within cross-functional teams. So we've already talked, saying really that next progression is around moving into bringing security into that DevOps environment. I mean, we've seen the successes of DevOps. We're seeing direct ties to business outcomes. And we're seeing that collaboration, that breaking down silos. And with today's environment and the ever need to increase security awareness. And then really what we're seeing is the DevOps teams are concerned if security is being roadblocked, or should they be really brought more into that left. Obviously, that is what should happen. And then when we ask really what is that next thing that you're going to be seeing in the next 12 to 24 months, 73% of the respondents said that they're currently seeing or they plan on seeing DevSecOps. I will say there was one thing that I was actually surprised about. I was actually very pleasantly surprised about on this chart here. If you look at data ops, 75% of the respondents said that they're currently seeing or planning on seeing data ops. And I think that is really true to what we're seeing actually within the industry and out there in the field, because really around being a data-driven enterprise and really having data as that core being able to manage when it comes to AI and edge computing and everything else that we're seeing going on. There has to be a focus on really incorporating your data ops. So that was really neat to see as well. And then, so now we know, and we've known that security really is that next focus within those collaboration teams. And this is really kind of telling on why. So we ask, how true is the statement within your organization? Security is usually an afterthought in our application delivery process. And you can see 50% of the respondents stated this is very true or sometimes true. So this kind of goes without saying. This is why then this can cause delays. This can cause issues within your development process if your teams are waiting on security or security comes in and says, wait, time out, and needs to do their due diligence. So the sooner that security teams can be brought into the process, the better that collaboration, the stronger your delivery is, the better customer experience all around. And then we ask, place the following DevOps trends in order for most important. And this just really confirms really what we've been talking about. And increased focus on security was the number one. Also, not surprisingly, increased automation was number two. What we're seeing across the board on really that automation being able to drive that change in saving time and resources, saving time and money, reducing errors, and really being able to drive to meet the customer's needs that are expecting something quicker, faster every day in the digital world. And the only way companies are going to really be able to embrace that is through automation, really at every layer of their IT enterprise. So that kind of gets us into that next piece on really tying in why security, and then within security, why that automation piece is so important. We asked about, do you have RBAC or role-based policies in place to limit access in your software development? Surprisingly, only 24% said always. This is something that we would look to see if it was higher. And then, does your security team pre-approve container security measures to increase your software deployment velocity? And again, only 23% said always. So this is where we talk about security really needs to be shifted left and really be part of that entire DevOps process, and even within your operations side and your implementation, your development of your containers. And how much time per week? Oh, and this was one of the really more interesting slides and data points that I think was really telling on why bringing in security and automation, one, bringing them in together, and why automation at all levels, not just security, but in this case, specifically security is so critical. And we asked, how much time per week could your team save if application security incidents, the detection was automated? And I will even bring it in one step farther in some of the research that we're looking at now is not only detection, but then automation and remediation. So you're seeing really here that 25% saying 25 to 40 hours per week can be saved. And almost 40% is saying at least 10 to 25 hours per week. So there's huge cost savings in time and fatigue of our teams by incorporating even just a little bit within security and automation. And how important is it to your company's growth strategy to have ability to detect and block exploits? automatically at runtime. So you can see 33% saying extremely important and 48% very important. And this gets back to really in the very beginning when I talked about having a strong strategy and even a strong culture and really having that integrated at the very beginning, and then had that cascaded down throughout the entire organization. And then how important is it to have business insights to accurately prioritize security incidents. And you can see across the board, excuse me, little frog in my throat, between extremely important and very important, you can see that is really critical within organizations. I mean, our security teams are just inundated by incidents every day, and our IT teams overall, when we look at our telemetry data, is just overwhelming on what the teams need to go through. So to be able to have your tool set to be able to prioritize effectively on your alerts and your incidents, to be able to have your teams only focus on what they need to, is really instrumental in the success. Otherwise, these teams just get burnt out and the fatigue gets there. And really, it just has a true impact into that customer service and just vulnerability overall within your organization. So that really kind of just wraps up on our research on really building on that DevOps piece. And in order to be able to implement and be successful in building collaborative teams, you really have to focus on those three pillars of people, process, and technology. But when we look at that next step on why security and automation is so important, it really is that fundamental glue that can bring everything together. Every aspect of an IT organization, or I would even a former CISO of mine, and I think every CISO says this, that it is everyone's business in the organization, whether you're IT, whether you're in the business, to be security minded. Security is everyone's business. It's just not the security team. And then tying in automation is really can drive at all levels of your IT department. So you take these two fundamental areas that are so key to every area within your IT group. That's going to be your building blocks to really break down silos and really bring in collaboration. And then to have the right technology to have that all in one place, a seamless location where everyone can see their own priorities and be able to collaborate and see workloads. We'll just go so far to be able to build success within the teams. So again, I want to thank AppDynamics and VMware Tanzu. And then with that, I also want to open up to any questions. So Riley, if there's questions.
Thank you, Will. Yes, we have time for a couple of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into them. The first is, when it comes to people, process, or tools, where would you focus most?
Yeah, no, I like that question because obviously that's kind of the structure that I wrote for those slides that you guys saw. Obviously, all three of them are important, but I mean, people, we talk about, I've often said a lot of technology problems are not really technology problems, they're people problems. When it comes to issues, it's trying to understand personalities and cultures. But once you get beyond that, like I talked about some of the things with the tools, companies are still using separate, even though they have collaboration tools, and then they have DevSecOps, and they're pretty far along that journey within a DevSecOps environment. Each group is still using separate tools for their work and responsibilities. Really, the tools are only being used for collaboration. So I would say that that's one of the key areas that needs to be focused on In this case, even though, like I said, normally technology isn't always the answer, but I truly think in this case, what I'm seeing, because tools are being evaluated every day, we're seeing tools sprawl, and we're seeing there could be 10, 20, even 50 tools doing the same thing within an organization, that is one of the areas that organizations need to focus on.
Thank you, Will. And speaking of people, how can we eliminate silos across IT teams?
Yeah, and I think we all kind of challenged with that one because, like I said, everyone knows that there's silos within IT teams. It's the bane of existence for, I think, every CIO. So I think finding a common thread that you can align the teams on, which is actually kind of one of the reasons why I really appreciate the questions and the dialogue that I had with our sponsors, because really one of those common threads is security. I mean, when I mentioned about my CISO saying security is everyone's responsibility, and I truly believe that. So it's one of those common threads that even if we're not talking about DevSecOps, it's just for collaboration across the board. Things like find that common thread that you can align your teams on. So whether it's security, whether it's automation, and even within those are building blocks for digital transformation. I mean, those are kind of the key that's going to drive that synergy across teams.
Thank you for those insights, Will, and I want to thank our audience for taking time out of their schedule to join us today. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email with the on-demand playback of today's webinar and some additional resources, so I hope you will check that email out, and I hope we'll see you at a future EMA Research webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.